right, let's do the prayers. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Okay. Where's the text? Just a sec. Oh, here. All right. Just to remind you, we talked a lot last time, and that was also part of the discussions in the discussion group about this view, Lama Tsongkhapa's view, as opposed to the view of some of the other traditions, the Kagyu Sakya Nyingma. It just came up because Lama Tsongkhapa here, and I'll discuss it further at the end of class, so let's just briefly just summarize, or I'll just summarize what we talked about. Lama Tsongkhapa basically says, well, when trying to understand emptiness, there's the danger to fall, there's danger to fall into the extreme of nihilism. And how does that danger come about? Well, when we analyze how phenomena really exist, of course we don't analyze whether they exist, we analyze how they exist. But it may seem that we analyze their existence in itself simply because for us the way they exist is that they exist inherently, and if we look for an inherently existent table and don't find it, it seems like we deny the table, we refute the table as well, because an inherently existent table and a table are the same thing. So based on our the way phenomena appear to us, of course, to every mind of ours, unless we've realized emptiness directly, but let's be realistic, that'll take a while until we get there. So right now, whatever appears to us, not in terms of whatever we're aware of, but whatever appears to us appears as if inherently existent. Now, Lama Tsongkhapa says, although things appear in that way, we still perceive them correctly, which I find really difficult. I find that really difficult in a way, because if they appear in a mistaken way and we perceive them through that appearance, how can we understand objects correctly? Which, interestingly, in many of the texts, they say, for instance, if to you something appears in a mistaken way, other than inherent existence, it's always a wrong consciousness. So, for instance, if I look at the mountain right now, so the snow mountain, due to the light, the kind of the sunset about to happen, it's like an orange, kind of an orange colored light, orange colored snow mountain appears to us. So actually, Snow, of course, is white, but it appears to us to be a yellow snow mountain. If a yellow snow mountain appears to our eye consciousness, although we know it doesn't exist, that eye consciousness becomes a wrong consciousness. So a yellow snow mountain doesn't exist. It appears to be a yellow snow mountain. Therefore, it's a mistaken, it's a wrong consciousness. Now you could argue, well, but we know the shape of the snow mountain. We don't know the color. We're mistaken with regard to the color. We're not mistaken with regard to the shape, right? Actually, I could tell you what the shape is like, although I'm mistaken about the color. But all that appears to my mind is a yellow snow mountain, and a yellow snow mountain doesn't have a shape. So if you were to say, oh, but I know the shape of the mountain, well, the existent mountain doesn't appear to me. The existent mountain is it's a white snow mountain, right? But what appears to me is a yellow snow mountain, which doesn't exist. Therefore, whatever is the shape of that thing that appears to me, that is non-existent, because it's the shape of a yellow snow mountain, and that doesn't exist. So there's this whole argument, for instance, when you put on glasses, blue tinted glasses, and you walk, I don't know, a gravel kind of path, like that's ordinarily white, it all appears blue. To your eye consciousness, it appears blue. And the eye consciousness, the object doesn't exist, there is no blue gravel path. I mean, mentally, of course, we know. Same with that snow mountain. But that's not the point. We're saying that sense consciousness is simply a wrong consciousness. Although mentally we know, oh, that's just because the light happens to be, well, yellowish, or in the case of the blue tinted glasses, the gravel just appears that way. However, the eye consciousness is a wrong consciousness. Mentally, I know. Mentally, I know. So based on that, if something appears to my mind, such as a blue gravel path, blue path consists, I mean, like blue gravel path, call it a gravel path. If to my eye consciousness such a path appears, which can't be, which is impossible, it becomes a wrong consciousness. But if to my eye consciousness, assuming you take up the glasses and you see the gravel path for what it is, as like a whitish kind of gravel path, if that gravel path appears to exist inherently, I still have a correct consciousness. So, for instance, I mean, it's a mistaken consciousness, but it's not a wrong consciousness. I can still perceive the gravel path. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says. That's Lama Tsongkhapa's view, versus the view of some of the traditions, or all the traditions that preceded the Gelug tradition, that would say, no, it's a wrong consciousness. It's a wrong consciousness. All of our minds are wrong consciousnesses. Thereby refuting the existence of conventional truth. So that's been a debate between the Sakya Nyingma Kagyu traditions and Lama Tsongkhapa. And both make sense to a certain degree. Both make sense to a certain degree. I mean, like, you can see it this way and you can see it that way. So in terms of how they express it, the words seem contradictory, but they just look at it from a different angle. Anyway, so as I just said, Lama Tsongkhapa says that although whatever appears to us appears inherently existent, it doesn't mean the mind is a wrong consciousness. While if it appears in a different way, for instance, as blue while it's not, the whole mind becomes a wrong consciousness. So the only exception is inherent existence. And the commentaries say, well, because we're so used to seeing things that way. We don't necessarily see white gravel as blue. It's not like you're born with that. This is just a temporary state with the snow mountain. It's just because of the sunlight. So that's different. Those are just temporary kind of causes of error. But regarding the inherent existence, that is an innate cause of error. That has been with us since beginningless time. So we're kind of used to it. We're used to it in that way. And so although things still appear that way, the object is still apprehended in a correct way. That's the reasoning used, but you can always debate it. Okay. So, having said that, Lama Tsongkhapa therefore warns, he says, well, be careful, don't deny conventional existence. And we go back to what we discussed last time towards the end of class. Okay. I did make a mistake and I corrected it. I'm still changing things around before I've got a final version. That's why Tika haven't sent it to you yet to be edited. Okay, so let me find it. Where is it? Where did we go? Oh yeah, here. So Lama Tsongkhapa therefore says, and I'll just read this part because I changed it a little bit. So according to Lama Tsongkhapa on page 73, it says, some people, however, maintain that every mental consciousness in the continuum of a sentient being, apart from the direct realization of emptiness, is a wrong consciousness. That's what some people, so the philosophical, the Tibetan philosophers or the Tibetan traditions before the Gelug tradition would say that. And not just the mental consciousness, also the sense consciousnesses. So any kind of consciousness, except for the direct realization of emptiness, is a wrong consciousness. Lama Tsongkhapa says in their view, well, that's not what Lama Tsongkhapa says. This is the explanation of what Lama Tsongkhapa said. So in their view, the objects of these minds must therefore be non-existent. Consequently, they reduce the entire conventional world, the way things function and appear in everyday life, to something that exists only from the perspective of sentient beings who have mistaken appearances, namely beings who are not absorbed in the meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. In this way, the conventional world is treated almost as a mere fantasy, and the validity of conventional truth is undermined. So that's Lama Tsongkhapa's view, but we've already seen it's not that clear cut. Saying, for instance, if everything appears inherently, how can we still, I'm aware of this table by way of the table appearing. And if it appears in a mistaken way, how can I know the merely conventionally existent table? So that is really difficult to answer. Okay. Anyway, so it goes on and on to say, well, if phenomena don't exist conventionally, then the Madhyamika system doesn't exist conventionally. Then everything that Chandrakirti says doesn't really exist. The fact that our hearers and solitude realizers arise from Buddhas, just quoting the first verses in the beginning, saying none of that is true. And he kind of says also, he says on the next page, he basically says from the perspective, what the philosophers say from the other traditions, they would say that the conventional truth only exists from the perspective of others, only exists from the perspective of a mistaken mind. Okay. And it makes sense. If I look at it that way, it kind of makes sense. From the perspective of others means that these practices are said to exist only in terms of how things appear to sentient beings who are not directly realizing emptiness, and not as part of the Madhyamika school-owned position. But then Lama Tsongkhapa says, if explained this way, compassion, bodhicitta, and wisdom would no longer count as genuine elements of the Madhyamika system. They would be treated instead as not part of it, mentioned only for the sake of less realized practitioners. So he sees a problem with this approach because he says it strips these practices of their real significance and makes them seem irrelevant to Madhyamika itself. And if they're explained only from the perspective of others, Madhyamika is left with nothing but the view of emptiness, without the path that lead to enlightenment. So you see, there's a difficulty on one hand, but both views are really difficult. In the end, it comes down to the fact that our mind is so limited. So the Buddha talks about something that is beyond words, beyond our limited perception, at this point at least. We can move beyond our limited perception, but right now our mind being so limited, therefore it's very difficult. Either way, whether you explain it the way it's explained, and I'm not talking about the tantric system, The tantric system, of course, in the Sakya, Nyingma, Gelug, they're all different. That's fine because they're all methods, different methods that work for certain people. If they have a karmic connection to that, it works well, and others work not as effectively. That's just a personal thing, and that's why it's beautiful to have these different tantric systems. On the sutric level, there are also differences, but they're not as great. There are not that many differences. I mean, the Four Noble Truths are explained the same way, impermanence and so forth. Sometimes the word permanent is used in a slightly different way, but once it's explained, it makes total sense why they use it, why it's used that way. Emptiness is explained slightly differently. And as we'll see once we open the discussion, you can look at it both ways, and both, I believe both make sense. Now I remember also about how they're falling to the extreme of nihilism, what is meant in that system. When I got back home, I remember it. That's how I learned it, but maybe Aileen, you can add something to that. But anyway, all right, so for now, of course, we're studying Lama Tsongkhapa's system, and I'm bombarding you not just with the 4 schools, that's difficult enough. I'm adding the different traditions. But it's beautiful because, well, you won't understand it right away. It'll be difficult, of course. I don't understand it completely, I mean, not at all. But it's beautiful to see that there's so many different ways to climb up a mountain. In other words, to explain the same thing, which is actually, as it says, inexpressible, indescribable, beyond words. Yeah. And you just have to find a way that works best for you. Okay. All right, so no need to go over this again. Then the next part of the text is headed, or the heading of the next section, or the next outline, is presenting the 10 grounds collectively, saying something about the 10 grounds in general. Now, I'm going to jump through this explanation on the stream entry and the once return. I know it's a little complicated, and it'll come up again. So I decided, let's leave it for now. Okay, that's just too complicated. Yeah, I can go back to that. Read it if you. Who's read this part about the once entry, the one here on page 76? Has anyone read it? Does anyone ever read that handout? No? No one? Okay. Has anyone read until that part? Oh my God, why am I writing with No one reads it. Okay. Yeah, it is what it is. Okay. Well, it's good to have it for me, at least. I'm prepared a little better as if I didn't have it. Maybe it'd be helpful to read it at some point. We're going through it together, but yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'll jump. I'll just leave it for now. I'll skip that part. I'll skip the part about stream entry, etc. So really, what it's saying, Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, he's quoting Arya Nagarjuna's precious garland, saying, well, there are 11 bodhisattva grounds. 11 if you count the Buddha's ground as well, the resultant ground. And in the precious garland, you have the 8 Shravaka grounds as taught in the Shravaka vehicle. And likewise, you have the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. Now, when it comes to these 8 Shravaka grounds, there are 2 interpretations, just roughly. 2 interpretations. One interpretation uses the stream entry, not once return, non-return, and arhatship, and then talks about approaching that particular result of stream entry, and then abiding in that result of stream entry, or remaining in that state of stream entry, and then the same for once return, non-return, and arhatship, which is a classification I believe is found in the Pali tradition. I don't know, it's explained the same way, but the stream entry, once return, non-return, I think is also explained there. So there's one way, according to these kind of 8 different levels, according to some texts, like for instance the auto commentary by Acharya Chandakirti, and then there's another version that's slightly different, which includes the solitary realizer path. So 8 different types. Also, actually, they can be applied to these stream entry and so forth, but in a slightly different way. So they have different names. They're called, what are they called? Ground of the lineage, ground of the eighth, ground of the seeing, and so forth. So they're usually mentioned in the commentaries. Then it's explained how they relate to the former 8. But it's also saying the Shravaka vehicle. The Shravaka vehicle or Hira vehicle has 2 meanings in the commentaries. One meaning is the practices that a Hira performs in order to become a Hira Arhat. But sometimes the foundational vehicle in general, which includes not only the practices of a Hira, but also the practices of a solitary realizer, is described as the Hira vehicle. So it includes all the foundational practices. So in other words, the foundational vehicle and the Hira vehicle are synonymous, according to one explanation. And then to be more specific, it can also be used separately, which is why here in the second version of these 8 grounds of a Hira, in the second version, according to that second version, the grounds, the different grounds mentioned here, they include the solitary realizer, because it's seen from the point of view of the foundational vehicle in general. That's all I explained in here. And so when you take a class in Tibetan, for instance, they're always counted. So what I put in here, I mean, of course, as you know, I cite the root text, I cite Lama Tsongkhapa's text, and the explanation is always based on the different classes that I've attended in the past, the one that I'm listening to now. I'm going to add also, if it's different from what I've put in here, add Geshe Dorje explanation. I got the material. So I'm just going to, if he said something that has not been mentioned that I believe is helpful, I mean, of course, whatever he says is helpful, but I will add that as well from now on. So in that way, hopefully you get a comprehensive understanding of what Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about. That's the whole point. Whether you read it or not is up to you. The thing is really, this is how we study Ummah. Do you want to study it the traditional way? That's what it is. I mean, this is the text we study. This is the explanation we get. So our teachers explain such and such. Like I said, I'm actually just translating whatever they say. A little bit also, of course, my own understanding, my very limited understanding, explaining these passages, but also adding the information. So in that way, you have no, even if you don't know Tibetan and you don't study it in the Tibetan, traditional Tibetan way, you get an understanding of what all this is about. Okay. And of course, right now, there are not that many debates and discussions, but they come later on. This is more like an introduction to the text. Yeah. Okay, so let's go from there. So page 79. I really have to give you the new material on Monday. I'm almost done with the next 15 pages. All right, so if you look at page 79, Lama Tsongkhapa himself says, Chandrakirti also bases his presentation on the 10 ground sutra. So Chandrakirti talks about the 10 grounds. He didn't just make it up. He talks about this from the point of view of different texts, based on different texts. We've heard a lot about Arya Nagarjuna, of course. He bases it on his explanations, but most importantly, of course, on the sutras, on the Buddha's teachings. So therefore, this is now Lama Tsongkhapa's text itself. Chandrakirti also bases his presentation on the 10 ground sutra. Here, the characterization of the 10 grounds, the first one being the perfect joy, as the 10 awakening minds, must be understood in terms of the ultimate awakening mind. All right, so what does he say here? Now it's the explanation. So in addition to the precious garland that I added, so in addition to the precious garland, Acharya Chandrakirti also relies on the 10 ground sutra, the Dasa Bhumika Sutra, or in Tibetan, Sachuvido. I just put the Tibetan and the Sanskrit, as a source for his presentation of the 10 grounds. In that sutra, the 10 bodhisattva grounds, beginning with the first, called perfect joy, are described as the 10 awakening minds. That's why each chapter is called that. The Chandrakirti's text, Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, has 11 chapters, and so does Illuminating the Intent by Lama Tsongkhapa. The auto commentary, all the texts, basically all the commentaries on Chandrakirti's, Acharya Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way have 11 chapters. And very conveniently, the first 10 are called the 10 awakening minds. The 10 bodhicittas, or the 10 awakening minds. So right now we're studying the first awakening mind, the first chapter. And then the last one is described as the resultant ground. Okay? It's titled, it has different titles. Sometimes it's just called the 11th chapter, whatever you want to call it. So in some of the different commentaries, they describe it slightly differently. But the point is, the first 10 that talk about the bodhisattva themselves, the bodhisattva path, they're called the 10 awakening minds. Okay. So as it says here, as a source for this, in that sutra, the 10 bodhisattva grounds, beginning with the first, called perfect joy, are described as the 10 awakening minds. This designation is the basis for naming the first 10 chapters of Entering the Middle Way as first awakening mind, second awakening mind, and so on. The 10 awakening minds mentioned here are not to be understood as conventional bodhicitta. So awakening mind, as you know by now, it's just another word for bodhicitta. In Tibetan, they have two words, semgye and chanchu sem. Chanchu means body, sem means chitta, so mind of enlightenment. Semgye, I think it doesn't really mean awakening, literally. It doesn't really mean awakened mind, but it kind of means the generated mind. So the mind that's generated in the form of the aspiration to become awakened. So I guess you could say awakened mind is kind of a awakening mind. So it's not the awakened mind, that would be a Buddha's mind, but the awakening mind. So a mind that is in the process, kind of generating whatever needs to be generated. So in that sense, semgye, yeah, I think awakening mind is a good translation. But usually we understand that to mean the conventional bodhicitta, the mind that wants to become the mind aspiring to attain Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings. No, but here it refers to ultimate bodhicitta. What is that? The meditative equipoise is directly realizing emptiness, but not just that, very important, sustained by great compassion and conventional bodhicitta. So conjoined with, literally in Tibetan it says conjoined with, but implied with that word is sustained by. So Geshe Kelsang uses the word sustained by, supported by, or influenced by great compassion, strengthened by great compassion, and so forth. So sustained by great compassion and conventional bodhicitta, and attained only from the universal path of seeing. So the path of seeing of the universal vehicle. Universal path of seeing sounds weird. Of the universal vehicle. Okay, I'll just change that. Because universal path sounds like a path that everyone travels. It's kind of weird. So I don't want to use the word Mahayana. I don't want to use the word great vehicle, as Geshe Kelsang says in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary version, or Lama Tsongkhapa's translation, he uses the word great vehicle. I don't want to use that. Mahayana I don't want to use, so I use the universal vehicle.
What is universal translating? What's the...
Mahayana. Yes. So it's His Holiness has used that translation in some of his writings. So you have the foundational vehicle, that's the Hinayana, as like the foundation, and the universal vehicle in terms of the motivation, universally wanting to take personal responsibility for the benefit of all sentient beings. I remember in some of His Holiness's writings, he used the universal vehicle. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Mahayana is really not a good translation. Great vehicle is also not my favorite. I mean, Mahayana is not a translation. Well, it's the Sanskrit word. It's the original word, but it has to be explained. And great vehicle, yeah. I like universal vehicle. Maybe I'm trying to be too politically correct here. The Nalanda tradition, no, it's also not the Nalanda vehicle. That's also weird.
Yana is vehicle or path?
Yeah, vehicle. Yana is vehicle.
Is it?
Yeah. No. Yana. Yana means vehicle. Yeah. Yeah. Path means the consciousnesses themselves. Yana means the different practices. So there's common locus. There's a common locus. It's like a vehicle. Also, a path is a path of a vehicle. Depends on how you define vehicle. Anyway, so the awakening mind. So here we're talking mainly from the point of view of the direct realization of emptiness. No surprise, since once we get to the 6th chapter, which is 70% of the entire text, it's all about emptiness, which is why it makes sense that these awakening minds are described from the point of view of realizing emptiness. But, of course, there's a lot more. I mean, this text talks about every single perfection. It talks about generosity in great detail. It talks about, ethical discipline or morality in great detail and so forth. Lama Tsongkhapa explains that in this context, the 10 grounds should not be taken as the Bodhisattva grounds in their full scope, at least not in general. When you hear awakening mind, the first thing you should hear is direct realization of emptiness. So it's a little bit weird. That's what they say here. But then when they explain, they don't talk about just the realization of emptiness. How much can you say about that? I mean, you can say a lot about the object. What is emptiness? How you come to directly realize emptiness? All that will be explained. And emptiness is, of course, the main subject. But at the same time, it does present the full scope. What does it mean to attain the excellent perfection of generosity? Like on the first ground, for instance, the emphasis is on generosity. So what is the difference between generosity on that level versus other levels? That'll be mentioned, that'll be explained. So the full scope is explained. But still he's saying in general, you shouldn't think of the different grounds in their full scope. The full scope would mean, well, they encompass not only the meditative equipoise realizing emptiness, but also the complete range of bodhisattva practices. Rather, here they are to be understood primarily in terms of ultimate bodhicitta, even if the chapters of entering the middle way also present the grounds from the perspective of the perfections, such as generosity and morality. The essential point then is that when the bodhisattva grounds are described as the 10 awakening minds, this refers above all to 10 meditative equipoises realizing emptiness, each sustained and strengthened by progressively deeper levels of great compassion, conventional bodhicitta, and other vast qualities. So the realization of emptiness is the same, but theirs becomes stronger. Each level of the direct realization of emptiness, once you're a bodhisattva on that level, becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Strengthened by progressively deeper levels, of course, of great compassion, conventional bodhicitta, and other vast qualities. Okay. Then Lama Tsongkhapa says, again, we're going back to the illuminating the intent, the commentary, the auto-commentary. So commentary in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, commentary always means Acharya Chandakirti's auto-commentary. So the auto-commentary by Acharya Chandakirti, that's so important because otherwise we'd be in the dark about many of the verses by Acharya Chandakirti. We wouldn't know how to interpret them because there are different ways to do so. So fortunately we have the auto-commentary. And Lama Tsongkhapa does an amazing job to integrate both Acharya Chandakirti's root text, entering the middle way, and the auto-commentary, in such a way that once you study illuminating the intent, then it's like you studied the auto-commentary. It's like you studied, of course, Chandakirti's root text anyway, no surprise, you understand it fully. But even reading the auto-commentary afterwards, which is much shorter, it's like you understand it because it's like a shorter version of Lama Tsongkhapa's text, which is great. Lama Tsongkhapa does such an amazing job explaining Chandakirti's text. Yeah. So anyway, Lama Tsongkhapa here now says, the commentary characterizes the nature of the 10 grounds as the ultimate awakening mind in the following. Now it's the auto-commentary, he cites the auto-commentary. He doesn't do that often. Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't often cite the auto-commentary, but here he does. So here's the quote from the auto-commentary, Acharya Chandakirti saying, when the uncontaminated gnosis of bodhisattvas which is sustained by compassion and so on, is divided in terms of its facets, it requires the name ground, for it constitutes the locus of the qualities. All right, and now Lama Tsongkhapa is talking. In the above, in this particular quote, the ground, here described as the uncontaminated gnosis, is explained through 4 factors: its nature, what sustains it thoroughly, how it acquires the name ground, and the etymology of its name. Okay, so from just reading this, it doesn't become clear, but then he explains it. So now I gave a short explanation, just giving you a short overview, and then Lama Tsongkhapa gives you more details. So Acharya Chandakirti's auto-commentary explains the 10 bodhisattva grounds, that is the ultimate bodhicitta in the continuum of an Arya bodhisattva, through 4 features: the nature of the grounds, what sustains the grounds, how the uncontaminated gnosis comes to be called ground, and the etymology of its name. All right, so this is all pretty similar. It's easy, we can just go through it quickly, but most important is the actual explanation that follows. So just briefly, the auto-commentary identifies the nature of the grounds as the uncontaminated gnosis of bodhisattvas. That's what the auto-commentary says. That's all it says about the nature. So this gnosis, or this wisdom, exalted wisdom, which directly realizes emptiness, is the essence of the bodhisattva ground and marks the distinction between an Arya bodhisattva and an ordinary practitioner of the Mahayana, of the universal vehicle, okay, or on the universal path. Okay, so that's the main difference. The second feature is described with the words, which is sustained by compassion and so on, which is indicating, as we said before, that ultimate bodhicitta does not stand alone, but is upheld and nourished by great compassion, conventional bodhicitta, and other altruistic states of mind. This means that this wisdom, therefore, is not merely a dry analytical realization. It is continually sustained by the aspiration to bring the highest benefit to all sentient beings and is directed toward that purpose. So very important, again, this idea of the mind that is most important in order to eliminate what's in the way to enlightenment is not some kind of dry realization, but is guided by the altruistic intentions. And then with the phrase, when divided in terms of its facets, Acharya Chandakirti introduces the 3rd feature, showing how the uncontaminated, non-dual gnosis, the realization of emptiness, is designated as a ground. It's called a ground. Ultimate bodhicitta on each ground can be understood as manifesting, for instance, successive degrees of facets of eliminating different obstructions. Okay? So on each level, each direct realization of emptiness eliminates something in the way to enlightenment. And then the auto-commentary explains the etymology of the term ground. So why do we call it ground? Sa in Tibetan. Sa can mean soil, can mean earth, and it can mean ground. So here it means ground. In this context, it means ground. It acquires the name ground, for it constitutes the locus of the qualities. So the word ground in Sanskrit bhumi, in Tibetan sa, carries the sense of a basis or foundation. Just as a fertile field provides the ground for crops to grow, the Bodhisattva's gnosis, the direct realization of emptiness, is the basis from which all the qualities of enlightenment, great compassion, skillful means, 10 powers, etc. develop. So it's based on that the qualities of a Buddha develop. These 4 features will now be discussed in detail. Okay, so first the nature of the ground. Lama Tsongkhapa says, some explain the nature of uncontaminated gnosis using the definition found in the treasury of Abhidharma in terms of not suitable for enhancing contamination. This suggests a lack of understanding of the unique meaning of what it means to be uncontaminated according to the system of Chandakirti. So this is mainly about what does contaminated mean? What is uncontaminated? So just to kind of slightly go back, we've learned that the main focus of these different levels of a bodhisattva, the different grounds, starting with the path of seeing, which is the first ground, the main practice is the direct realization of emptiness, but we can't see it isolated. We have to understand it in the context of many other qualities, which will be discussed. We need to understand that, well, it's nature, what is sustained by, what is the third feature? Oh, that is called a ground, and then the reason for why it's called a ground. Okay. So as mentioned, so Lama Tsongkhapa said what I just read, and now the explanation comes. As mentioned above, Acharya Chandrakirti's auto-commentary describes the first feature of the Bodhisattva ground with the words, the uncontaminated gnosis of bodhisattvas. So regarding the meaning of uncontaminated, what is uncontaminated? We hear this all the time, the contaminated aggregates, the uncontaminated wisdom of a Buddha. What does that even mean? It's definitely not a word we associate with what is explained here, like contaminated, usually like contaminated water or, I don't know, uncontaminated food. It means something quite different. However, in the Buddhist context, yeah, this is an important concept. And Sarche Same, I wonder, like, I don't think it's used on the daily basis, Sarche Same. I don't think, they say dirty instead of using the Tibetan term. But of course, there's a lot of Tibetan terminology that's very specific and is usually used in the Buddhist context. Now, we don't have Buddhist language, well, some, a few words that an outsider who's never heard about Buddhism wouldn't understand. But in general, we use like everyday kind of language. So here, contaminated, uncontaminated is one of those terms. So why is this direct realization of emptiness, why is it uncontaminated? What's uncontaminated about it? And what is everything else? Everything else, basically, so this is saying only the wisdom directly realizing emptiness is uncontaminated. Everything else is contaminated. So we are contaminated, our minds are contaminated, our aggregates are contaminated. All right, that sounds pretty pessimistic. Like, oh my God, don't even have that mind realizing emptiness. How frustrating is that? Okay, and anyway, but contaminated is also sometimes used in a slightly different way. But let's see, in this context here, regarding the meaning of uncontaminated in the expression uncontaminated gnosis, some scholars explain it with reference to Acharya Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidharma, Abhidharma Kosha. We've all heard about that, right? The Abhidharma Kosha. Abhidharma Kosha or Chungwempa Dzu. Sometimes also called Treasury of Knowledge in English, which defines uncontaminated as not suitable for enhancing contamination. As not suitable. I know this is really weird, but in English, in Tibetan, it's just as weird. Not suitable for, what does that even mean? It's an expression that is used a lot, but really a good translation is not suitable as Rungwa in Tibetan. I mean, it's used actually in everyday language. Oh, it's not suitable that this person, goes out like that or whatever. It's actually used in the same way, except in the Buddhist context, it's like not suitable for enhancing contamination. What does that even mean? And it's debated, definitely. What does it mean? Okay. In this sense, it refers to phenomena incapable of serving as the condition for the arising of afflictions. That makes sense, right? So what does it mean to not be suitable to give rise to contamination? It means incapable of serving as the condition or the basis for the arising of afflictions such as attachment, anger, or ignorance. Whereas contaminated refers to phenomena that can give rise to such afflictions. Okay. However, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, applying this definition within Acharya Chandrakirti's system overlooks the distinctive way he understands the term, as will be shown below. All right, so Acharya Chandrakirti says, no. That's not how we define contaminated or uncontaminated. When you study treasure of Abhidharma or Abhidharma kosha, that's what you're taught. Moreover, this definition cannot be accepted as valid. So first, what Lama Tsongkhapa directly says, it's like, that's not the distinctive way to understand this term. That's not how we understand this term in general. But then, in terms of the debate that would arise, this definition cannot be accepted as valid because there are phenomena that are uncontaminated but do not fulfill the definition. So he goes as far as saying, not only does Chandrakirti not accept, he says, Chandrakirti doesn't accept, you don't define it, you don't describe the main characteristics of contaminated or uncontaminated in that way, but it's also not a correct definition. So correct definition in that, as many of you will know, we talk about a definition and that which it defines. So the technical term in English would be a definiendum. Yeah, some of you know that. So whatever is the definition, what does the definition mean? A definition basically describes the main characteristics of something. So once you know the definition of something, then you understand what that which is defined refers to, obviously. Simple examples are impermanent. So that which is momentary, that which changes moment by moment. That's an example of something that's momentary. And so whatever fulfills that definition must be impermanent. It's as simple as that. In other words, the relationship between the definition and the definiendum, that which is defined, must be such that whatever fulfills the definition must be impermanent. Whatever is impermanent must fulfill the definition. So there's 8 ways of saying the same thing. Well, no, there are 4 ways of saying the same thing. So whatever fulfills the definition is necessarily impermanent. Whatever is impermanent fulfills the definition. Whatever is not impermanent does not fulfill the definition. What does not fulfill the definition? So there's 4 ways of saying that. And then you also add wherever there is something that fulfills the definition, there is something that is impermanent. So wherever something exists that fulfills the definition, there exists something that is impermanent. Right. So just a complicated way of saying what I said in the very beginning. Basically, whatever fulfills the definition is the definiendum and vice versa. But here, Acharya Chandrakirti says, well, first of all, even if the definition, whatever fulfills the definition would be uncontaminated, and whatever is contaminated fulfills the definition, even that would be true, but I don't define it that way. That's what Acharya Chandrakirti would say. I define it differently. But that's on top of that, it doesn't fulfill the definition. The definition is not in all cases fulfilled when it comes to contaminated. So there are phenomena that are uncontaminated but do not fulfill the definition. Does anyone have an example? No, you can't think. No. Okay. Such phenomena are suitable for enhancing afflictions. So there are phenomena that are suitable for enhancing afflictions in the sense that they can give rise to afflictions in the mind of others. An example is the Dharmakaya or truth body of the Buddha, which refers to the enlightened qualities such as the Buddha's enlightened mind and his cessation of all obstructions. So Buddha Shakyamuni, his mind, the absence of all obstructions in his continuum is called the Dharmakaya. This Dharmakaya is definitely uncontaminated because it's free from the root ignorance and its imprints and its residual imprints. Yet it can serve as a condition for afflictions to arise. Why? Because in the continuum of ordinary beings, it gives rise to the ignorance grasping at its intrinsic existence. So you can look at the Buddha's qualities and generate ignorance. They say not attachment, not anger. Like if you get angry with the Buddha, you're not perceiving whatever you're focusing on is not really a quality of the Buddha. You're misperceiving the qualities. So with regard to anger and attachment, it's a little different. But when it comes to ignorance can arise with regard to everything. So here, and we'll see now how it's defined very differently. According to Chandrakirti, the definition of contaminated is different. So if you had an uncontaminated mind, let's say you realized emptiness directly, according to Vasubandhu, it would be contaminated, because I could, if I knew your mind, if I had some idea of your mind, I mean, for instance, I can logically infer that you've realized emptiness directly and now generate the mind that grasps at the inherent existence of your mind, then this uncontaminated mind of yours is not suitable not to give rise to contaminations, because it gives rise to contaminations in another person's mind. Kind of seems like weird, but that's the definition, right? That definition. So just because something gives rise to ignorance in the continuum of another person, it's contaminated. So really, in the end, everything is contaminated, because everything can be taken to mind, at least conceptually, and can give rise to, at the very least, the ignorance perceiving the intrinsic existence of that. Right? So anyway, the Abhidhamma Kosha's definition is not accepted as the definition of something contaminated. So this is from, I put a little footnote. This example is given by the great Mongolian scholar Geshe Kelsang Wangmo-la, who lived in the 19th century, in his commentary on illuminating the intent, entitled An Annotated Commentary on the General Meaning of Madhyamika, the lamp that clearly illuminates the profound meaning. So this is a commentary we read usually in order to understand illuminating the intent. It's quite helpful, some parts of it, and it gives that kind of debate. It offers that debate. Okay, so never mind. If you study debate, this will be something interesting for you. All right, so okay, why does the definition, it follows that? So take the subject uncontaminated, or take the subject, the definition of uncontaminated, it follows it is not correct. And then you ask, why is it not correct? Well, because whatever is uncontaminated does not necessarily fulfill that particular definition. An example is the uncontaminated qualities of a Buddha. They can still give rise, they're still suitable to give rise to afflictions in ordinary persons' continua. And therefore, the definition is not correct. Okay, so let's see, according to Acharya Chandrakirti, what the definition is. So here Lama Tsongkhapa says, our own position is this: what is contaminated is tainted either by ignorance, grasping at true existence, or by the imprints of such ignorance. The gnosis, so the direct realization of emptiness, free of such taint, is uncontaminated. Okay, so that's what Lama Tsongkhapa says. That's all he says. And then follows an explanation. According to Acharya Chandrakirti, the meaning of contaminated, I left out the two in your text, but I added it later on. So according to Acharya Chandrakirti, the meaning of contaminated, in Tibetan sarje, and uncontaminated samme, is as follows. Okay, so contaminated. A phenomenon is contaminated when it is tainted by the ignorance that apprehends phenomena as truly or intrinsically existent, or by the residual imprints left by that misconception. Okay. So sentient beings who have not yet attained liberation from cyclic existence are tainted by both. Okay, let's look at ourselves. We are affected by both. The root ignorance, we very much have that ignorance. Not every mind, according to Lama Tsongkhapa, apprehends intrinsic existence, but every mind is affected by the imprints. Right? So right now, we are said to be contaminated. We are contaminated because we have this root misconception every now and then. When does it pop up? When do we have the root misconception? Pardon?
All the time.
All the time. Yeah. Well, it's not constantly there. It's not constantly there. Can you think of a moment practically when it arises? When could it be there? Like, when do we grasp at intrinsic existence? What would be a moment when it arises? It's not there all the time.
Anger.
Yeah, well, but anger is preceded. How do we get to anger? Remember, we went through this before. What is this? I gave you like a little, like a illustration, like a chart kind of thing, where what is the root and then how we get to anger? How does it work? That is really important to identify our anger, to identify our other afflictions. What do you think? Pardon? Okay, self-grasping. All right. So grasping at, what does self-grasping mean? Can you describe that, mind? You're right, it's self-grasping, but what does it really mean? What does self refer to? What does grasping refer to?
Looking at the self that exists as solid and independent.
Right. When we say, actually, this is a little bit misleading. Self-grasping, the self of self-grasping. What is the self of self-grasping? Is that the I? No. 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 The self of self-grasping, just as selflessness, the self of selflessness does not refer to the self. This is prasangika. This is this is a little bit difficult. So, grasping at a self, prasangika school. What is the selflessness? What does the self refer to? Or grasping at a self. What does the self refer to?
Objective existence.
As objective or inherent existence. Therefore, selflessness and emptiness are the same. In the Prasangika school, selflessness just means the absence of inherent existence. So therefore, we say grasping at the self of person. Right? We don't just say grasping at a self. Self-grasping is the general expression for grasping at inherent existence. It's not surprising that you're confused, because that's often how it's used, especially in the other schools. So it's important to become familiar with this vocabulary in the Prasangika school. So selflessness and emptiness in the Prasangika school are the same. Same meaning. Same meaning. Okay. So therefore, when you realize emptiness, you realize selflessness. Thus, selflessness is no self, which is inherent existence. Lessness is emptiness. Yeah. So it's just getting used to this vocabulary. It's interesting why. I mean, you could argue, you could then debate. Why do you call emptiness selflessness? We're so used to saying self with regard to the I. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I have my view, I have my opinion on that. I have my opinion on that. I'm not sure this is right, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, if I ask someone who knows better, they'll disagree. But I have no other reason. I can't come up with another reason. How can I put it? It's really difficult it's quite difficult to explain it. Selflessness. So we see a self in a table, for instance. So I don't want to say a personality in a table. That takes it too far. But in a way, I mean, sometimes we may have that sense, but intrinsic existence here is the self. So actually, when we say there is an actual self here, but a table doesn't have a self, when we use the term in a different way, right? It actually in Tibetan is the same way. You can talk about yourself, say da, or you can say damme. Use the same words, the same syllable in Tibetan. Da, I, right? Dakcha, we, right? Da, I, damme. It's the same word in Tibetan. So in some contexts, especially when it's written, when you ordinarily speak Tibetan, you say nga. That's the kind of colloquial for, or like spoken Tibetan, you don't say da. In written Tibetan, you say da. So there is a existent self, in other words. There is an existent self. But the inherently existent self doesn't exist. So when you say, my da is damme. My self is selfless, in other words. You don't really put it that way, but never mind. It's correct to say myself is selfless. So just as there's no inherent I, when it comes to myself, there's no inherent I in anything. There's no inherent essence in anything. So in a way, when we say I, it's almost like the essence of me as a person, right? The way I think of myself. So not just the conventional I. The conventional I is the merely labeled, the nominal I on the basis of mind or body. That's not how it seems to me at all. I have a sense that there's an essence which is me. Something that is my essence. Isn't that true? When you think of yourself as this essence that controls, of course, everything else, it can go to that degree. But thinking of myself as the controller of mind and body is a slightly coarser version of that very subtle sense, my essence is the I. The essence of myself is the I. That's what I have to look after. That essence. And that essence cannot be found, just as the table doesn't have an essence, like some kind of essence that makes it a table. So Da in the sense of like an essence, right? Da, yes, go ahead.
I'm just thinking identity.
Identity is a little tricky. I know that sometimes they talk about the view of identity, but identity exists. And what is your identity anyway? I mean, then identity exists, right? So what is my identity? I mean, based on the different labels, like my identity is based on my German passport, I label German. Based on my certain body parts and the way I feel about myself, I label woman. Based on my vows, I label nun. So the sum of all these I call my identity, and that exists. So first I thought the identity view was a great word, but then I thought about it again, and now I disagree. Because I was thinking, what does identity even mean, right? So my identity is not the I. The I has an identity, but the I is the essence. Just think of your sense of self. Isn't that the essence of who you are? My essence. That has an identity, that has a mind, that has a body, but in the end it's my essence. That is my Da. And that is so precious, right? Everything is at the periphery of that, but like in terms of my mind, my mind and body, they're like more at the periphery of my essence. But the way I look at myself as having this essence, I believe you have this essence, your Da. And even this phone, being mine, has this essence of being mine, being so preciously. So even that seems to have an essence, right? So a Da to that extent. And I've discussed this before in classes. When we look at for certain objects, especially when they belong to us, it almost seems, I say it almost seems they have like a personality, like your house that protects you, right? It's almost like this big person kind of like putting you under its wings and protecting you from the hot, from the heat, from the cold and so forth. I mean, it's almost like seems to have a character. Or cars. I discussed this before. Like we even give our cars names, and it seems to have a personality. Oh, today it's a bad mood. It's not working, making a funny sound, etc. So especially the things we're attached to. Watch your own mind. Doesn't it seem there's something in it that's its essence? Like especially if you like it, it's your friend. It feels like a friend. And sometimes in cartoons, like children can relate to that, I guess. Maybe in the way they see the world, with cupboards talking and houses talking and cars talking. I mean, it seems to reflect, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but it seems somehow to reflect that sense there's a personality even within inanimate objects, especially if we're familiar with them, especially if they serve us well, if we're attached to them, right? The clothes you like the most, your phone, your computer, like your laptop, right? Do you have that sense personally? Some may disagree. Some may go, nah, never. But I know my mom always calling her cars Julius. I mean, every single car was given that same name. They didn't even have different name. It was always called Julius. They were usually, in the beginning, they were VW Beetles. right? So they're just different colors, but yeah, so they always had the same name. So I remember that, but I also remember growing up with cartoons, and also my sense of the objects I own, the objects I'm most attached to. Seems to be an essence that serves me really well. So that essence would possibly be another way of saying inherent existence. Therefore, it doesn't have such an essence. All phenomena lack this essence. So when I grasp at that essence, going back to what you said, that grasping at the self, that grasping at the self is the grasping at inherent existence. Which is why, you're right, grasping at the self is the root. But in particular, grasping at the self of my own I, this essence of my own I, right? Grasping at the inherent existence of myself, which gives rise to perceiving this I. So first I've perceived this I to be inherently existent, to be intrinsically existent. In other words, I believe there to be this essence that is not just labeled, but it's basically really there. And then based on that, I exaggerate its importance, which gives rise to attachment. And that attachment is called self-centeredness or self-cherishing, because it considers it to be more important than everyone else. So I go from that root misconception to exaggerating the importance of I, and of course also the importance of my happiness, giving rise to attachment to that I called self-cherishing, which in turn then gives rise to anger if someone harms that very precious I, and most important, my very important happiness, giving rise to anger. So when we get angry, that anger is usually preceded by a moment of grasping at the I, grasping at the inherent existence, I should say, of the I. I'm so precious, how dare they? And then also perceiving the other person as inherently negative. So we grasp in that moment. It may just be that split moment, which then gives rise to the afflictions. Okay, so it's not always present, but when the afflictions arise, in particular aversion and attachment, it's very likely to have been there briefly. Just a short moment. It's because also what's interesting, if you now do something that really upsets me, there's a gap between your action and my anger, right? So it's quite interesting. I'm just thinking of this image. I've got this image in my mind. It's kind of ridiculous that I'm smiling at you, right? And you say something insulting. So my smile is still there. You said it, I'm saying, and slowly the smile disappears. And it turns into a frown. What makes that smile disappear? What's going on in my mind? Oh, they said that to me. Grasping at inherent existence. Me, so precious. A split second of I'm more precious than everyone else, and my happiness is too. Attachment. Then giving rise to the sense of the inherent existence of these negative words. They're inherently bad, and so on. And so anger arises. We're so good at it. It's so quick, right? But it still takes that moment from the smiling face turning into a frowning face, or at least a serious face. Does that make sense? We're just not aware of it. We're so focused on what the person said that we're not aware of what's happening. Okay, now having said this, therefore, yes, we have root ignorance because we have afflictions. And if there are afflictions, there's the root ignorance, because it's the root of these afflictions. All right. But we also, so we're contaminated for that reason. But of course, we're also contaminated because of the imprints. In every experience we have, and we always have mind. Unconscious is not a word you use in Buddhism. You are not unconscious, literally. Unless you say unsense conscious, that you are. Unsense conscious, yeah, that's true. So really unconscious means your sense consciousnesses are not there. But when you faint, when you're in a coma, if you're in a coma, when you're asleep and so forth. At those times, we say we're unconscious. Well, simply because the sense consciousnesses are not actively there. The sense consciousnesses are not there. So it's okay to say unconscious. I'm not saying you can't use that word, but in the literal sense, it's impossible to be without consciousness. So even when you're in deep sleep, there's always consciousness. There's always consciousness. Now, we have no memory of that, but that doesn't mean anything. I have no memory of having breakfast 3 weeks ago. So, I'm not saying I didn't have breakfast 3 weeks ago. So no big deal, first of all, just because we don't remember. And when we're unconscious, we don't remember when we're awake, right? Unless you're dreaming, maybe you remember events from when you were awake. Or when we're awake, we remember our dreams. That's possible. But usually these two events, being unconscious, so being asleep, whatever, and being awake, there's not much knowledge of one another, is there? So when you're in deep sleep, I don't know, do you remember being in deep sleep ever? I remember the gap. I kind of do when my mom sometimes gets the timing upside down and she calls at the wrong time and it's like 2 in India. So it's like sometimes I'm like this deep sleep and I awake and I remember it was just that blackness. I kind of have a sense of blackness. I don't know, because that could be the object of my mind in deep sleep, just darkness. I don't know. I seem to have a memory of just that. So I'm like disoriented, like the first time I wake up and I'm like, what? Like disoriented for a few moments. So the deeper my sleep, the stronger the disorientation in that moment, yes. So the stronger it gets. So it's really interesting. But I have a sense of memory. I don't know. I don't think it's just a gap. It's not just there's a nothingness and I remember that. No, I seem to experience that deep darkness. I mean, not darkness in a negative way, just nothingness. Anyway, so in that moment I have a bit of a sense, and if I dreamt anyway, if I had a dream during that moment, of course, usually I remember. But I have to make a point to think about it, because the next morning I've forgotten. Otherwise, I only remember that I remembered the dream, but I have no idea what it was. So if it was a good dream, I have to take a moment to stay awake and think, what was the dream? Okay, register that, and then I can remember the next morning. So it's really interesting how these faces, P-H-A-S-E-S, these faces, they don't really interact with each other. But there's always mind. And then what's very interesting nowadays is you have all these videos of people having accounts of being in a coma, having a near-death experience. And what do they say? That's the most fascinating part, like especially with the near-death experience. They say, now looking back, their near-death experiences seem to be more real than their existence now. Right now, what we experience in our awakened state is the most real it ever gets. It seems the most real experience, while dreams are different. But what I thought was really interesting, what we hold on to, and I spoke about this before, what we think is normal and real. Like I said, for me, for the longest time, normal was German normal. Trees were normal when they looked like German trees. The 4 seasons were normal if they accorded with the German. Food was normal if it tasted like the food I grew up with. So all my memories from when I grew up, that was normal. And anything that was not normal, right? How people were, like when I came to Asia, I was like, people are so weird. People who were not German, who didn't act like Germans, were weird. So it's interesting. My fast memories in this life, that was the normal. But then you have these experiences of people in near-death experiences, and everything that we seemed normal, and which actually isn't normal, because just a lifetime ago it was very different. right? A lifetime ago, if I was a little dog, I keep thinking I have some imprints from Tibet. So maybe I was a dog in a monastery. I looked down at this furry body and that was normal, right? That was a normal body. 4 legs, right? Some ticks and what have you. That was normal. And now I look down on the body and that seems normal. But it's so interesting, again, to learn to let go of just our sense of identity, which our sense of identity is very much influenced by an inherently existent identity. It seems an inherently existent identity. That's the problem. The identity, the convention is not a problem. That seems real. That's the actual real thing. And everything is measured based on that. But then if you have like a near-death experience, and suddenly all this becomes illusionary. And what happened then? That is reality. Wow, it can really put things upside down. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. That's a different reality. So your unconscious, your sense consciousnesses are not there, but your experience. So there's always mind, always at all times. And unfortunately, what appears to it is always inherent existence. That's why it's contaminated. It's very much affected in a profound way by our root misconception that is not always active, but everything always appears that way. That's why understanding emptiness is so difficult. That's why it's so difficult. We don't even know from our experience. We go back to all the experiences we had, and none of that matches emptiness. None of our experiences. Unless you, of course, have a taste of emptiness. But like ordinary experiences, or maybe remember I talked about the inspiration by a Lama. Maybe you had a moment. Maybe in the moment of that Lama, so you can go back to that. It's just a memory now. We still have to do, Bernd asked this question in one of their discussions. He asked like, are you okay then? You had that kind of experience? Have you now entered a certain level? Because, nah, unless you had already entered that level through your own practice in the past and the Lama's inspiration triggered that. The Lama inspired you somehow that it triggered that. But if you're doing totally new, the Lama can give you a taste of something, but all you're left with is the memory. But that's very valuable. Oh, I had that moment. So there is something, okay, which keeps us going, that kind of memory. Okay. Anyway, so having said all this, so sentient beings who have not yet attained liberation from psychic existence like us, well, I assume you haven't yet, I don't know, I can only talk about myself really, not yet attained liberation from psychic existence are tainted by both the root ignorance itself and its imprint. They're influenced by the former because their mental afflictions such as ignorance, attachment and aversion are under its control. So we're under the control of this. Even certain of our ordinary, now I kept saying here I talked about sentient beings, but even certain of our ordinary virtuous consciousnesses are tainted by it. If, for instance, our mind engages in generosity out of attachment for someone, right? Even our generosity, it's virtuous, but it's contaminated, right? So for instance, we engage in generosity because I'm attached to that person. I give them a lot of money, hoping they won't leave me, or hope they will like me better. I mean, people, you have to always check like generosity in our own mind. I mean, other people doesn't matter whatever they do, but in our own mind, what is our motivation? Why do we give to them and not to someone else? Right? Maybe we want them to like us. Maybe out of a self-centered wish to become famous, to have our name written on the side of a building. Right? I mean, some people are very obsessive about that. There's nothing wrong having a name on the side of a building if that's what they want to do, but if it's all about like my name first or whatever, well, we know what kind of generosity that is. So even our virtuous actions can be affected, and then they become samsaric actions. They keep us in samsara. Actually, it's debatable, I guess, most of our actions. Yeah, definitely if ignorance is involved, it keeps us in samsara. So that's why they're virtuous samsaric actions. Where do they come from? Of course, from the motivation of ignorance. out of attachment for someone, or out of the self-centered wish to become famous because of having made a large donation. Beings who have not yet eliminated the obstructions to liberation are also under the influence of the imprints of ignorance, because all of them have not yet eliminated obstructions are also under the... So beings who have not yet eliminated the obstructions to liberation are also under the influence of the imprints of ignorance, because all of our minds are mistaken. To us, objects appear intrinsically. The one exception... there's a formatting mistake, at least in my version. The one exception is the meditative equipoise that directly realizes emptiness. So that's the only exception. This non-dual gnosis is the only consciousness in the continuum of a sentient being. Of course, a Buddha, the mind in the Buddha, of course, always uncontaminated. But for us as sentient beings, it's the only mind that is entirely free from both the taints of the root ignorance and its imprint. In its imprints. However, such gnosis does not arise in the continuum of ordinary beings. It is attained only upon reaching the path of seeing, of hearers, solitary realizers, or bodhisattvas. So you have to reach one of those paths of seeing. Okay. Please note that if something is tainted by the root ignorance, it is necessarily tainted by its imprints, obviously. But if it is tainted by the imprints, it is not necessarily tainted by the root ignorance itself. Right? Examples include the sense consciousnesses. They never grasp at inherent existence. That's the good thing. The sense consciousnesses, however limited they are, at least they can't grasp at an inherent existence. Or bodhicitta in the continuum of sentient beings. It's a conceptual mind, therefore it has the appearance of inherent existence. These are not under the control of the root misconception, for they neither grasp at intrinsic existence, nor are they motivated by such grasping. Nevertheless, they remain influenced by its lingering traces, since the objects appearing to them still seem to exist intrinsically. All right, so in that way, definitely when it comes to ourselves as a person, us as a person, we are contaminated. Our aggregates are contaminated, our body is contaminated. It's the result of our afflictions, right? Especially the root affliction. We say affliction and karma. Implied in that is, of course, the root misconception, which is ignorance. Examples of sentient beings who are tainted by the imprints of ignorance, but not by the ignorance itself, are Hira Arhats, solitary realizer Arhats, and Bodhisattva Arhats. So those who attain liberation. Hearers and solitary realizers attain arhatship, or liberation from cyclic existence, upon reaching their respective path of no more learning. Bodhisattvas attain arhatship on the 8th bodhisattva ground, which belongs to the path of meditation. So actually, when you think about it, path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, and the second ground, in many commentaries, they occur simultaneously. So when do you move to the second ground? When you move on to the path of meditation. Does that make sense? The first ground is on the path of seeing. The second ground starts with the path of meditation. And then from the second to the 10th ground, you're on the path of meditation. So you have 9 grounds that belong to the path of meditation. And it's only the 8th when you become liberated. That's pretty close to enlightenment, if you think about it. In terms of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, not liberated. 8, 9, 10, finally liberated. But still not enlightened, right? So just to get the map, the enlightenment map. Okay. All right, so here solitary realizers is clear because they have their path, and their path of no more learning, right? They also start with the path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. And then they still have to enter the universal path in order to become Buddhas. But they've already cleared out a lot of mess. So for them, it's actually much faster. But in case you wonder, is it faster to first become a hero and then become a Buddha? No, you'll stay in that path of no more learning for an extended period of time, in that bliss. You'll remain in that bliss for a really long time, and that's the problem. Okay? Okay, never mind. It's a detour, therefore. Okay. Examples of sentient beings who are tainted by the imprints of ignorance. So that's what I just said. Bodhisattva. So once these three, here are arhats, bodhisattva, arhat, solitary realizer, arhats, attain liberation and have eliminated the mind that grasps at the self, grasps at intrinsic existence, and are no longer under its control. So that one is gone. Okay. And also the other afflictions, of course, they're gone. Yet, until they achieve the fully awakened state of a Buddha, all their consciousnesses, with the exception of the meditative backward voice directly realizing emptiness, remain affected by the appearance of intrinsic existence, and thus by the imprints of ignorance. Right? So once you become an arhat, you're no longer contaminated with respect to the root ignorance. That's gone for good, but the imprints still trouble you, which are called the cognitive obstructions, or the obstructions to enlightenment, because, that's what they still have left. Another example of a contaminated phenomenon, other than sentient beings or their minds, is mentioned by Lama Tsongkhapa in the 24th chapter of his great commentary on the fundamental wisdom. So illuminating the intent is a commentary on Acharya Chandrakirti's entering into the middle way, which in turn is a commentary on the fundamental wisdom. But Lama Tsongkhapa also composed a commentary on the fundamental wisdom itself, Arya Nagarjuna's root text on emptiness. So that is translated into English. Didn't I put I forgot to put a little footnote. Okay, I'll put a footnote in there. It's an English translation by J. Garfield and another person, forget the other person's name, called Ocean of Reasoning, I think, or Ocean of Reasoning, I think it's called. Anyway, I'll give you all the details. So this text has been translated into English. Another example of a contaminated phenomenon other than sentient beings or their minds is mentioned in this text, the great commentary on the fundamental wisdom, Sasha Tikchen, where Lama Tsongkhapa states, the impure world, its inhabitants and so on, that are tainted by the imprints of ignorance. So the impure world, this world, that is contaminated. What does that even mean? The impure world refers to the environment perceived and inhabited by ordinary beings, us, our world, our environment. It is considered contaminated because it has arisen under the power or influence of their root ignorance and its imprints, being the result of these causes. Huh? What does that even mean? What about Bodhgaya? Shouldn't it be under the influence of the Buddha's uncontaminated? Because the Buddha spent some time there, right? So what is it? What is Bodhgaya? Contaminated or uncontaminated?
Nowadays.
Nowadays it's contaminated, it's kind of dirty and dusty. No, but was it uncontaminated when the Buddha was there? I mean, ordinary beings lived there.
For Buddha it was uncontaminated.
For the Buddha it was uncontaminated. For the Buddha it was uncontaminated. So is this environment both contaminated and uncontaminated?
For us it's contaminated.
For a Buddha it's uncontaminated. So it's both, right? Contaminated and uncontaminated. Yeah, in a way.
Inner part of the temple.
Pardon?
The most inner part of the temple.
The most inner part. So you mean this homeless residence?
No, I mean in Bodhgaya.
In Bodhgaya. Oh. The one that the one I perceive, or the one that a Buddha perceives?
I perceive it also.
Yeah, right. But do we perceive the same? I mean, I have my perspective, right? So my perception of Bodhgaya is definitely affected by my own afflictions, right? I mean, what I perceive is very much influenced by my mind, and my mind is influenced by my ignorance and my, right? So like we keep saying there's nothing objectively out there. There's nothing objectively out there.
So that means everything in this universe is contaminated.
Everything I perceive. I don't know about you guys. You could all be Buddhas, like I keep saying.
So few Buddhas around.
We don't know. Like I'm saying, we could, I mean, if you were a Buddha, you would do your best to conceal it because I'd be overwhelmed. You could all be enlightened and hear from my benefit. No, the other way around. You could all be enlightened. I keep saying that for years, but honestly, I have no way of knowing. And you would be so good at concealing it, of course. Think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm just a simple monk, and everyone goes, yeah, right. Right? His Holiness, and a lot of people, I'm sure they see him that way. Like people, when he traveled to the West, for instance, and there are these beautiful videos of His Holiness, like compassion in, what is it called, about the color chakra, the heart of Tibet or something, on these old videos. Beautiful, you should watch them. It's so beautiful. His Holiness traveling to California and giving the color chakra. And you see him outside, these Californians like jogging past His Holiness's hotel, and His Holiness kind of looking at them, smiling, and they're like, ooh, stop, and they talk to His Holiness. I'm pretty sure they thought he was extraordinary, but not in the sense of like beyond an ordinary person, but just like a really nice monk. I guess whatever they thought His Holiness was. So very friendly and, smiling, but seeing His Holiness as an ordinary person. And so His Holiness, that's what His Holiness wants people to think, who are not open to understanding who He really is, because they can only relate to Him in that way. You can't relate to a Buddha. It's like, it's overwhelming. Okay, anyway, so the point is, therefore, it very much depends on our mind. What is my reality other than the reality I perceive? Right? There's nothing beyond that. Even conceptually, I believe in the existence of radio waves and so forth, but I've never perceived them. So they're part of my reality, though conceptually, but that's all. My reality reflects what my mind perceives. Okay. We need to really get into, emotionally understand that, on an emotional level, not just on an intellectual level. On an intellectual level, yes. But if we really understand that, we wouldn't always blame others for what's happening. It really goes back to a certain degree to the Chittamatra school. It goes back to the Chittamatra school, one Buddha less. So it goes back to the Chittamatra school, basically, to a certain degree, right? What is my reality comes from my own mind. Maybe this is also a good time to open it to discussion. We've done an hour and a half. I bombarded you with this. Anyway, having said all this, well, let's return to some of the things we talked about before. Maybe allow me to say a little bit about why Lama Tsongkhapa and this comparison that I started with in the very beginning. In the other schools, in the other traditions, I keep saying schools, they're not schools, they're different traditions, Sakya Kagyu Nyingma. You mentioned also, Aidan and some others mentioned what's called a tetralemma. Tetralemma is just a Greek word for, I think it's called four premises. Four premises. Now, it's not literally the meaning, the actual meaning in Greek, it's not even talking about that. Just because you have four premises, tetralemma mean different things in Buddhism. But here in this context, the way I learned it, for instance, when we learned the different traditions other than the Gelug tradition, that was part of our study, at least the Sutric system, we were told that phenomena do not exist inherently. They do not lack inherent existence either. So they do not exist inherently. They also do not exist inherently. They're not both inherently existent and not inherently existent, and they're not neither. So that was like, huh? So the second was really difficult. The second was really difficult to say they don't lack inherent existence. They're not either non-inherent, they're also not non-inherently existent. That became really difficult. And on top of that, what we learned was conventional truth don't exist. Conventional truth don't exist in the sense that they're just mere appearances to ignorant living beings. From the perspective of the mind of an ignorant being, conventional truth exists, but other than that, they don't. And so, in the end, I guess, they were also saying emptiness doesn't exist. Yeah, emptiness also doesn't exist. But what I understood after some time was that whatever we say, it always comes with inherent existence. So to say emptiness, or to say lack of inherent existence, for us that exists inherently. So when we say the lack of inherent existence exists, to our mind exists inherently, and that's why they negate that. But I would argue saying it's beyond that also is not correct, because then beyond to us means inherently beyond. So in the end, you have to, you can't say anything about anything because it's always inherently existed, I would argue. But I understand why in those traditions they say, why they focus on it's not this, it's not this, it's not that, because we always grasp. And so in that sense, it really makes sense. So there's no contradiction as such, I believe, because what it means is something different. Saying even emptiness doesn't exist. I mean, we're not talking about that ordinary sense of existence, which again, as I just said, means inherently such. Correct me if I'm wrong, right, Aidan? I hope I say it correctly. And then so then I remembered also, what is the extreme of nihilism? To believe this is inherently non-existent, right? To be inherently non-existent, that phenomena don't exist at all, but inherently so, of course. Yeah, that would be the extreme of nihilism. So not saying it's beyond existence and non-existence, that's not the extreme of nihilism, but believing they're inherently non-existent, right? So in that sense, so being beyond existence and non-existence means being beyond our ordinary sense of existence and non-existence. Now, this is one way of putting it, and as I said before, it's definitely very helpful to counteract reification, to counteract our sense of inherent existence, to understand that when we think we understand it, well, we won't, as long as we have a mind that still grasps that inherent existence. Therefore, the language can be very helpful to overcome this grasping, still holding onto science. I think at the tenzin in Tibetan, the word they use a lot is tenzin. Ten kind of means science, and zin means grasping. Still grasping at something really there, still grasping at something really, right? Whether it's existent or non-existent. Lama Tsongkhapa puts it differently. He says, we need to understand conventional truth, but as lacking inherent existence, so a non-inherently existent. And that can be understood through this approach of talking about conventional truth, but emphasizing that they are merely labeled. That doesn't mean, for one person that may be helpful to eventually understand that what we perceive right now, the conventional truth we perceive, is not real conventional truth, to move beyond that. For another person, the other approach may be more helpful. It's just a difference in terms of personality. Okay, so those were the tetralemmas, but there are other tetralemmas, there are other positions. For instance, when it comes to, and Jumipam, what you said, that was, I didn't sound in any way unfamiliar, what you sent to me. And then Tomer also posted a shorter version, but I think that was very similar. So Jumipam, the great Nyingma master, who said that, who explained it very beautifully. So phenomena don't arise or are not caused by something that is the same as themselves, but not by something that is inherently different either, not by something that is both, or not by something that is neither. That's one of the very important verses of Chandakirti's, Acharya Chandakirti's text, of course, based on Arya Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. So very important discussion about this tetralemma. We'll have a lot of discussions on that. How do phenomena come into existence? It's not just about how they exist, but also how do they come into existence? What does that mean? It needs to be discussed extensively. Okay, having said all this, let me just go back I think the earliest, someone posted something about fiber laser cutting. Honestly, Banu, oh yeah, it's Banu. I still don't know whether Banu is a man or a woman. First I thought it was a man. And then I remembered I know this woman called Banu. She's a woman, she's Indian. She's an Indian lady. So I thought, oh, and I kept saying her. But then I Googled it the other day. It's more a male name. It's a unisex, like a unisexual name. I mean, both. I still don't know Banu whether male, my apologies. But then Banu posted fiber laser cutting machine. Okay, I don't know why, but I haven't clicked on the link yet, to be honest. Yes?
You mentioned something about
the laser.
Yeah.
Of course. Oh, yes. Banu is a lady.
She lived here sometimes.
Oh.
She will come back.
Oh, maybe I do know her then.
It's a very strange place. Sorry, I forgot which country.
Oh, maybe I do know her then.
You know her, I'm sure.
Maybe. Okay.
Anyway.
All right. Okay. Then Jimmy says, when it comes to we're talking about similarities, are things similar or not? So he's talking about merely labeled similarities. Remember, like saying are things. He says similarities don't exist, but his argument was, I don't know whether similar experiences. He argued they're not similar experiences, while saying that I don't know whether your experience is similar in mine. I don't know whether, right? Like when I say my experiences are similar to another person, taking it from my perspective, he argues, I don't know whether the other person has a similar experience or whether it's totally different. Now that is true. But then last time I argued, well, then I don't even know whether you're a sentient being, because I don't know whether you have a mind or not. For all I know, you could be zombies. That was my argument. So, but then I also talked about, well, similarity, let's say, without taking it just from my perspective, or saying we're both humans. We're all humans, so we're similar in that respect. But what does it mean to be similar? Similar means on the basis of certain aspects we have in common, we label similar. That's also what he says. It's just labeled. There's no absolute similarity. We could even argue that everything that exists is similar because it's similar in being existent. And in our texts, there are a lot of debates about what does it mean to be of a similar type. In the end, you could say everything that exists, even things that don't exist, are similar to things that exist because we can think about them. So everything can be taken to mind, whether it exists or not. So in that sense, you could argue everything is similar, but of course that's not how the word is usually used. Anyway, what it shows us is some of the words we use, it's always in relation to something. We can say it's similar, but there's no absolute similar, right? But then he says something, and I think there's some misunderstanding about what mere appearances mean. Mere appearance doesn't mean just because something appears, therefore it's a mere appearance. As we learn later on, mere appearances mean usually they refer to phenomena existing and being labeled, therefore they appear to the mind. So we don't even include the horns of a rabbit. I mean, they are mere appearances. I mean, anything can appear to the mind. But mere appearances mean something that is grounded in reality. Whereas here, I'm not going to read the whole message because it's quite long, it seems to be saying, yeah, subjective experiences never mind, they're all based on mere appearances. But the problem is mere appearances mean something more, it means something existent in a particular context. False also, falsity doesn't mean doesn't exist. False means it exists one way and appears in a different way. So all conventional truth are described as falsities. So I don't think I need to go through it here. I think it'll become clearer as we discuss more about this terminology. So anyway, but if it works, it's fine, absolutely. Then Aidan, he posted this great video about numbers. It's a really good video about numbers. So how do numbers exist? Yeah, so it's this number file. Are numbers, is it the Platonian system? Are they imaginative? Are they fictional? Or are they nominal? So in other words, are there numbers that float somewhere in space, and so therefore we can count? Are they merely, exist because they're two cups or two pencils or two of something else? Therefore we say there's two, or are they just a fiction? Are they just imaginary? I mean, have we just imagined them? They don't really exist. Which one do you think? Number 1, 2, or 3? Is it numerical Platonism? Numbers exist out there in space. Nominal, do they exist nominally? As in you have 2 cups, therefore we say 2. Unless you have 2 or 3 things, you can't have 2. 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So in terms of how children learn numbers, you've got 2 pencils, you've got 2 pieces of cake, therefore you have 2. Or are they just fictional? Are they, what do you think? 1, 2, or 3?
2.
Pardon?
2.
2. The other 2 are the extremes. Platonism is like reification. They exist somewhere in space. That's like reification. Fictional is like they don't exist at all. We just made them up. That would be the extreme of nihilism. So it's nominalism. Nominalism. If Rika was here today, I would answer her question about conventionalities. Rika asked this question about phenomena existing conventionally. That seems to imply, and she's right, the English term, that there's more than one person involved, like a group of people. That's what the word conventional means. But in Tibetan, it doesn't have that connotation at all. It means more nominal. And one person, I mean, we create we have our own thoughts, our own ideas. We don't have to share them. It's like we do say, okay, we've all agreed this is a table. We use language. And so when we think about a table, we may use the word table, thinking, right? We think in a particular language. If you speak more than one language, you know. When I learned Tibetan, I forced myself to think in Tibetan because I thought that would improve my Tibetan. I noticed I was thinking in German or in English, but I think in different languages. So if you speak more than one language, I think you know what I'm talking about, which means there are conventions, that language is based on conventions, but that doesn't mean that every thought we have is based on something that everyone else has. No, it's very subjective. Labeling happens with every thought. This is this, this is that, this is this, this is that. We label in every moment we have thoughts. So the mind is always labeling, and that's very subjective. You don't need to all label the same for a label to happen. Are you labeling the same? Are you having the same thoughts? No, so conventional existence is a good word, but it needs to be slightly redefined. Yeah, so I thought that was an important question. She's not here now, so...
She's listening online.
Pardon?
She said she's listening online.
Oh, great, Rika. So, okay, so an answer to her question. Okay, great. So, yes, conventional doesn't really mean like a lot of people. It just means nominally, as in the sense like created by our own thoughts, if you like. Okay, let me make sure I don't forget anything. All right, then Bernd asked a question. So it's like he thinks it's like there's a paradox, but I think I explained it slightly before. So hopefully with the tetralemma and we go more into it, it has become clearer. Then he talks about some person called, what's his name? Göringer or something? Yeah, it's a long discussion. I don't think I need to go into it. Unless if you find your question, Bernd, if you find your question hasn't been answered, please ask again. So he says there's a lot to learn. Yeah, we're just starting. So the 6th chapter, of course, there's a lot more about it. The tetralemmas, we go more into it. Okay. Gödel's incompleteness. Yeah, I don't understand that. That's about mathematics. All right. Generic image, opaque or transparent. All right. And someone read the handouts. Yeah. Phyllis says she read the handout. All right. Okay. Anyway, do you have more questions? First of all, before I get into it here. Rika. Oh, that's how you write Rika. Oh, so she is there. Yeah, I thought it was a Rika, so that's why I didn't notice that. All right, okay, go ahead. Any questions from you if you have a question about anything we discussed? No? Okay, if not, all right. Could you tell me more? So Manu asks, Gödel, I still don't understand Gödel. I have to Google Gödel. And he's a mathematician, yeah. I read a little bit about him and it was all about mathematics and whatever, whereas I can't even repeat. So I think as Jimmy is saying, it's helpful. It's helpful, like the logic is helpful, but it's of course different. The moment we talk about numbers, it's not the same logic that we apply here. I mean, it's a different system. All right, so Bandu says, could you tell me more about subtle body imprints? Why is it that the subtle body is not noticeable? Is it part of the form aggregate? What does it take to observe it? What is the subtle body? What does subtle body mean? Do we all have a subtle body right now? Yeah, absolutely. We have a subtle body. What is it? What is the subtle body? Come on, those of you who studied. Tika does this. Right? Like the energy in the body, right? And then you said, so the energy wins. Yeah, right. So the energy in our body, why is it that the subtle body is not noticeable? Well, to some people it is noticeable, right? But the subtle energy in the body, why is it not noticeable? Why do we not notice it? I mean, because it's subtle, but yes, Aiden?
Because our mind is too gross.
Because our mind is too gross. Okay, our mind is right now too gross. It's too preoccupied with, I guess, stuff, like sensory objects, with itself. So yeah, I guess you could say, if you start meditating, I mean, people who engage in these advanced kind of meditations, tantric meditation, they're very, very much aware of them, but you have to look inwards. I mean, we only pay attention to our body if there's great pleasure or great pain. Otherwise, we don't, right? We don't pay attention to it. And we're so focused on outside and, gaining stuff for the eye. It always seems like happiness comes from outside. We don't realize it comes from inside. So we're not focused on the inside. We're focused on gaining likes, virtual or otherwise, other people liking us. What else? We're focused on getting good food and maybe more money and more, right? So yeah, we just don't pay attention. Don't pay enough attention. So that's why it's subtle for us. Our mind is too gross, or too coarse, as Aiden says, because it's so preoccupied with gaining stuff from outside. Is it part of the form aggregate? Yes, absolutely. What does it take to observe it? Leave out all the distractions, start meditating. And then Jimmy asks, is the generic image opaque or transparent? What is opaque?
Okay.
Opaque.
Yeah, not black, you can't see through it.
Oh, as like a black hole, opaque, as in like you can't look through it.
Not transparent.
Not transparent. Oh, opaque in the sense of not transparent. Or transparent. Huh. Well, if I ask you now, think of your breakfast. Did you have breakfast this morning? Or whatever meal you had. Think of the last meal you had. Okay, think of it. Does it appear to your mind? Is it opaque or transparent? You see, the thing is, it doesn't appear as clearly as if it were in front of you, right? Which I find quite interesting because in movies sometimes when the person remembers, it's black and white or hazy. Like it's kind of hazy at the edges. It's not that sharp. Which to me means our memory, of course, it's through the generic image we have. And so things appear not as clearly as if they were in front of us. So this is all I can say, but opaque or transparent, it depends on the memory, it depends on the thought. If you think of something transparent, then the generic image resembles that. If you think of a piece of glass, a shiny no, not shiny, but a clean piece of glass, which is transparent, then their generic image resembles that. It's like an appearance of the object that resembles it enough so that you can get at that object through this appearance. From what I've heard from other schools, they often use only existence and not qualify it with inherent. Yes, sometimes they say it doesn't exist, it's not non-existent. Sometimes it's used that way. But when we studied it, they actually specified. They did, I mean, sometimes it doesn't exist inherently, it doesn't exist non-inherently. So it depended on the context. Sometimes, yeah, it was just said doesn't exist and it's not non-existent. Yeah, so as Aidan previously talked about it, like neither existent nor non-existent, yeah. So it was often there for the confusion that when they say not existent, if it means existent like sky flower. Well, it depends on the context. You could use it either way. Existent as in like ordinarily existent, so it doesn't exist because our existence means inherent existence. It's not non-existence because that means inherently non-existent. None of those work. Okay. So Tome writes, relating to the tetralemma of existence, non-existence, etc. The earlier traditions, do they understand the tetralemma as inherently existent or simply existent? I think you can say both ways. Right? It's not existent because for us it means inherently existent, or it lacks inherent existence. You can spell it out, but for us, like again, everything we take to mind appears as inherently existent. So in the other schools, they say that even our eye consciousness perceiving a table is a wrong consciousness because it appears inherently while it's not. So its object doesn't exist. They say it's an inherently existent table you take to mind. But Lama Tsongkhapa disagrees. He says you can take to mind the table. Though it appears inherently, you can still take to mind the table. And I find that difficult. I have a hard time with that. I can only take to mind a table when it appears to me. And what appears is an inherently existent table. So how does my mind separate between the inherently existent table and a table? I don't know. But if you don't say that, then conventional truth don't exist. Then conventional truth don't exist because all our minds are wrong consciousnesses. And what conventional truth would there be? The conventional truth that appears to a Buddha. Okay. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa talks about. The conventional truth that the Lama Tsongkhapa talks about that does exist, separate from what I just said about how we perceive things, that is the one that appears to a Buddha. But how do we know it exists? Aidan, go ahead.
How does a Buddha have conceptual consciousness perceive?
Pardon?
How does a Buddha who doesn't have conceptual consciousness perceive conventional phenomena?
Directly experiences it directly.
A conventional phenomena only exists because sentient beings existed. Right? Because all the conventional phenomena are conceptual consciousness.
All conventional phenomena are not conceptual. When you can, with an eye consciousness, you can perceive. I think according to Lama Tsongkhapa's view, like you see a table, and eye consciousness perceives table. So you're. Pardon?
Labels it table.
The labeling comes from the mental consciousness. Yes. So, but let's. This is an important point that Aidan is making. I just saw there's some more questions. Aidan says. So let's say a Buddha doesn't label. Let's say, no, the Buddha doesn't label. A Buddha doesn't label. A Buddha doesn't have a conceptual mind. What does labeling mean? Labeling means thinking it is this, it is that. So you're constantly labeling. We're all constantly labeling. We're commenting on what is going on around us. There's this constant narrator, right? It's the mental consciousness, the conceptual mind. Most of our mental consciousnesses, if not all, are conceptual. And we're constantly labeling. We're reinforcing how we see the world, constantly, right? Someone says something, we think about it. Something happens, we think about it. So we're constantly trapped in that. So Aidan's argument is, conventional truth, therefore, only exists because they're labeled. But that's true for ultimate truth as well. Ultimate truth are merely labeled. whatever exists is merely labeled. So that's not just true for conventional truth. So you could argue, can a Buddha? So what about a Buddha? A Buddha perceives ultimate truth and conventional truth, but doesn't label. So does for a Buddha do phenomena not exist because the Buddha doesn't label? You can take it a little bit further, saying if no one labels in a particular moment, does nothing exist? But here there's an answer that you find in the texts. For instance, we all know what a kilo means, a kilogram. A kilogram is 1,000 grams, right? Can this particular object, let's say it was a kilo, is this a kilo right now? Yes. No one is weighing it, but you don't need to weigh it for it to be a kilo. So if in a particular moment no one is labeling something, it's still merely labeled, even though no one is labeling, just as this object is still a kilo, although without anyone weighing it. So it's just saying how phenomena exist, what it means. They're merely labeled. So even the Buddha doesn't label, or at a certain point in time no one is labeling. So let's say we all leave the room and no one is thinking this is a room, this is a room. Does the room disappear? No. Right? If I don't weigh this object, it doesn't mean it no longer weighs a kilo. For it to be a kilo, I have to always weigh this object? No. It's still a kilo. It's just saying, how does it exist, or what is it weighed? It means 1,000 grams. That's what it means. So when I weigh it, that's the result I get. Similarly here, phenomena being merely labeled doesn't mean in order for it to exist, you have to label in that moment, or for a Buddha to exist, the Buddha has to label. Right? For a Buddha, he doesn't have to weigh it's a kilo to know it's a kilo, right? So knowing that is labeled by sentient beings, that's enough. So that sounds really difficult. I know it's so hard. I mean, it seems like the non-findability is much easier. Which is, the non-findability of things is much easier than understanding they're merely labeled. And that's why Lama Tsongkhapa says in his three principal aspects of the path, the non-findability is not enough. You have to put it together, bring it together with dependent arising, that they're merely labeled. And when they both make sense, when they don't seem to contradict one another, that they lack inherent existence and they're merely labeled, only then we fully understand it. And that's what's so difficult, right? So merely labeled, not even labeled by Buddha. The Buddha doesn't label. So it seems like there's a Buddha over here, doesn't label. So actually, I could say if that were the case, then even emptiness wouldn't exist for a Buddha, because that's also merely labeled. Everything is labeled, right? So you have to say the same about emptiness. Emptiness is just labeled. There's nothing that's not labeled. Spit it out.
You say emptiness doesn't exist or not exist.
Pardon?
Emptiness doesn't exist or not exist.
Doesn't, but it's beyond, it's beyond existence. Okay, but everything is beyond existence.
Yeah, and that's why the Buddha doesn't perceive it.
But actually, even beyond, it's not even beyond existence, because beyond existence is also our limited. So you can't even say it's beyond existence, right?
I think that's why the Buddha remains silent in the forest.
Which Buddha? No, I'm kidding. Yes?
I once heard in a teaching the explanation that there is a certain school who explains it like that the Buddha is aware of conventional truths or labeled through being aware of the minds of us.
It's in this text as well. Lama Tsongkhapa says the same thing. Yeah, we'll come to this. Lama Tsongkhapa says this also in illuminating the intent. Yes, absolutely. So Rika says, I was wondering about conventional truth in relationship to valid cognizer. Is conventional truth just established by valid cognizers? And what makes it a valid cognition? This is also something Jimmy said. Because actually, he said like in a different universe, things may be really different. And that reminded me of reading about the Pure Realms, When you read about the pure realms, I worked on a text about Abhirati for some time, so of course I had to read the text. And so in there it says like food just, you have a thought about food and it just manifests. Well, I can try that here. No, not working, right? So the thing is, he was also saying, how does it work? Like in other places you don't become dirty. Here, if I don't take a shower for a few days, I'll start getting smelly. But in other universe or in other realms, it doesn't happen. So the laws of nature are quite different. And so Rika is saying, I was wondering about the conventional truth in relation to valid cognizers. So what makes it valid? It's an interesting question, right? So, okay, what makes something valid? This is really complicated. It's kind of like circular argument. Does it exist? So we say it exists because there's a valid cognition, right? So it seems like, okay, that's pretty easy. There's a valid cognition. But what makes it valid? How do I know I'm not fantasizing? For instance, when I see this bowl with liquid, and that bowl with liquid that everyone else sees as water, if I see it as pus and blood, I say I have a wrong consciousness. Unless I was a preta being. Unless I was a being on a different realm, then I would perceive it correctly. But if I saw it as a human, saw it as, so who decides? Is that merely labeled? I mean, first of all, what is water? We have to decide on, sorry, I'm a little bit, so we have to decide on what does water mean. If I call pus and blood water, that's a different matter. But first of all, what am I talking about when we talk about water? Okay, so we agree on something, we have a definition we all agree on, and then apply a label. And if then what I perceive is not in accordance with that definition, I can say it's a wrong consciousness. But if I perceive it that way, who is wrong? You or me? Right? You see what I'm saying? How do I know someone is hallucinating? We say conventionally a person is hallucinating. But maybe they see exactly that. Maybe they see pus and blood because they have this brief preta karma ripening in that moment, right? It's just some kind of fluke, some kind of weird happening. So are they mistaken or not? Aiden, you raised your hand. Yeah.
Like you're thinking of the sun going across the sky.
Yeah, the sun, moving across.
Conventionally,
we say the sun rises in the east, but that's actually not correct.
conventionally at one point it was correct. It was
At some point it was, yeah.
It was a conventional truth.
Right. No, it wasn't. Unless, so the sun rising, Aiden's question is, like we say the sun rises in the east. That's literally not right, because the earth is turning. The sun doesn't rise, the sun doesn't move. But we used to say that. So his question is, was that at some point a conventional truth when everyone accepted it? And the answer is no. No, at that time, the sun was still in the same spot. It was the earth moving, giving rise to the appearance of the sun rising. So we were mistaken then. It was never a conventional truth. It was a wrong consciousness.
So the atomic theory of...
Pardon?
Atomic theory is a wrong consciousness.
Say again?
Atomic theory. Like in physics.
Oh, it was a physician, the name of a physician?
Atoms, and then we refine that, we refine it, and now we're quantum physics.
Right.
Different ideas of quantum physics.
Yes.
Everything that preceded that has been refuted.
Yes.
And it's not true.
Yes, it was all a wrong consciousness from a Buddhist point of view. So the atoms, the way they were understood, I mean, maybe even now things are we still have a wrong consciousness. I mean, we assume that this is correct, but yeah. So let's assume they got it right now. So now it's a correct consciousness. But during the times of the Greeks, I mean, the word atom. What does the word atom means? Partless. It's the Greek word for partless, and that's impossible. Therefore, yes, they would all be wrong. It sounds very, what's the word? Say la.
Disappointing.
Oh, disappointing. No, I was more thinking like arrogant. It sounds more like arrogant. We got it all wrong. They were all wrong. It sounds kind of, but yeah. It's really difficult. But then when you start analyzing it, you see, conventionally we say, all right, we agree a table looks like this, and so this is not a penguin. That's pretty obvious. So if someone perceives a penguin, it's a wrong consciousness. That's what we would say conventionally. But when you start analyzing it, it starts falling apart. If this person is truly seeing a penguin, because they have the karma to see it, then there is a penguin of the celestial realm, and they have that karma. Like, I'm just making things up. So we would say in relation to the human realm, okay, so you could say it's a wrong consciousness because it's not what ordinarily humans see. So in that case, you could say it's a wrong consciousness. But you see, the moment we start analyzing, things start falling apart. That's the thing about emptiness. If phenomena existed truly, this wouldn't happen, if they existed intrinsically. So yes, unfortunately, Rika, I couldn't answer that, and there's no time to answer the other questions, but I will next time. And if any of you find your question hasn't been answered, please post it again. Great. Thank you very much. So let's dedicate. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara Denzing Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you very much.